How do you know when it's time to grease your leaf spring suspension? Only took me 7 tries to get that spit out, but I finally did. So stick around all the way through this video. We're going to cover squeaky leaf spring suspension, how to inspect, when it's time to inspect, and just all the ins and outs. Today we're going to be talking about this bad boy and all the components associated with it. I went out in the yard and tried to find the junkiest trailer I could find, and I really wasn't finding nothing. Then I remember my old buddy Jim's trailer was here, and after pulling it in the shop, I'm probably gonna be able to get 15 to 20 videos off of this junker. No offense, Jim, but it's time to do some maintenance, my brother. So we're gonna talk about the leaf spring suspension. If you see this one here, it is old and dirty. I honestly just went and dug this out of the dumpster. We get a question, I see questions all over the interwebs about greasing leaves, not greasing leaves. I'm going to give you my opinion towards the end of the video, but I'm going to show you what to look for on your suspension, just on your walk around, and how to control that squeaky, annoying noise when you're going down the road, maybe on a bumpy road, and it's just driving you nuts. We're going to show you some things that you can do to correct that, to maybe quieten it down. So I'm going to grab a few things and let's jump right into it. So just remember, what I'm going to show you today is just stuff that I see, my experience. Do your own research, your own trial and error, see what works best for you. A lot of the squeak, in my opinion, comes from the leaf springs. They get some age on them, maybe some corrosion, maybe some gunk, some road grime in there, and that will cause them to squeak. I've got one here that I actually pull the tie bolt out, but sometimes you can see, you really can't see on this one, but sometimes you'll get gapping on the spring. If you have a spring that is gapped out like that, when you take the load off, that spring is getting to the point of being completely worn out if it's not already. We're just going to show you the components and inspection. We're not going to show you how to repair this. We've done some videos on that we'll leave in the description below. So when you go to click to subscribe and give us a thumbs up, leave us a comment, check out the links in the description to our repair videos that may help you source some of your parts and show you the ins and outs on how to replace some of these components if yours are worn out. We'll also leave some links in the description below with just your basic spring suspension components, and I'll try to find some of the upgraded equalizers and some of the wet bolt upgrades on there as well. We'll leave a link to the lock and lube and some of the products we use, so check that out when you leave us a comment. So the leaf spring will squeak. The other places it's going to squeak is going to be shackle straps, shackle bolts, and equalizer. And this is a double eye suspension setup. You'll also have a slipper spring setup. The components are going to be different, but it's still going to have an equalizer. It's going to have one spring eye, then just a hook, and it's going to have more of a friction. Those will get squeaky because it's actually metal to metal all the time on that. You need to familiarize yourself with your trailer and do a walk around on it. Your suspension really needs to be checked at a minimum 1 time a year. If you're pulling it quite a bit, you may check that more often. Some of these components, like the equalizer and the shackle straps, you can see those without removing the tire. I've removed the tires on this trailer to try to get all the black widows off of it, and so that we can better film it and show you, but it's not necessarily all the time to remove the tire on your walk around. You can see the front bolts, the center bolts, and all your shackle straps as well. So we're going to take a look down here. We're going to move the camera around, and I'm going to show you kind of what to look for on your walk around. Then we'll discuss maybe some ways that you can stop the squeak. So one place to look, and once you've seen it, once you know that it's worn, you'll be able to identify it. But this spring here is sticking up pretty high above the shackle strap. If everything were new, it would look more like that. There would be very little protrusion of the spring eye above the shackle strap, but you would be able to see that with the trailer setting on the ground. That would be a good indicator that you may have a worn bushing, a worn bolt, or that you may have worn all the way through that and wearing into the spring. If you look down here below, if you can see the hole on the back side, I think you can see it on there, on the back side of that bolt head, you should not be able to see any void in there. You shouldn't be able to see anything. So if I put that up, it should look more like that. Even if it's rusty, even if it's not brand new looking, it should look like that, not like that. You can see how loose this suspension is. You're not going to be able to tell that with your trailer on the ground with the tires on it. To do that type of an inspection, you would need to properly support the trailer, possibly take the tires off and get underneath it to take a look. We'll look back down at the equalizer. I'm going to show you how loose this one is. I mean, that one there, that is going to be beyond bushing. It's going to be a replacement without even looking at it. I can guarantee it needs to be replaced. Springs, probably 100% chance the springs need to be replaced. If you look at this spring eye, it's already got a complete tear out, so that one's about to give it up. So once that tears out, this spring will actually go up and it will hit the bottom of the frame, and you're going to lose suspension travel in that. Also, as you notice, many manufacturers do this. They've put the bolts with the head in this direction. If you watch our repair videos, we come in with the bolt on the rear side. That way, if this does tear out or come out, the bolt does not come out and dig into the sidewall of the tire. I prefer to put them in reverse, and then we always put a small spot weld on the nut and the bolt. So these are some very common places to squeak, and this is something you need to be looking at on your walk around, along with the leaf spring and the U-bolt. Also look at the spring seat where it connects to the top of the spring or to the bottom of the spring if it's on an overslung or underslung, and the U-bolt, just to make sure everything is tight. If you look at this, you can tell there's quite a bit of rust on here. The rust will cause squeak. The rust will cause maybe some premature wear on the unit. It's actually eating away. Depending on what part of the country you live in, it may be sooner or later. So all those things combined, just with age in itself, is going to cause you some squeak. So there's where the big question comes. What do I do with a squeak? If you get on the interwebs, you're going to find a lot of information. Some of it I agree with, some of it I probably don't agree with. And like I said, I'll give you my opinion, just my opinion. At the end, you do what you want. I'm just going to show you a couple scenarios, what we've seen people do, what we've seen people not do, and see maybe if it works for you. Remember, at the end of the day, when it stops squeaking, that's when you got to worry, because that means it probably fell off. Or if it's squeaking enough, you got to have a good radio, you turn it up, then you can't hear the squeak, right? That's the way most people do it. It's kind of like putting a piece of electrical tape over that check engine light before you get it inspected. If you can't see it, it's really not there. So let's take a look at this leaf spring here. You can see some rust. This leaf spring's worn completely out. It actually broke the eye off of it. But what holds this stack together is a spring tie bolt. And these spring tie bolts are one-time use only. And if you'll notice, that dude is very long. But the way that works, when you tighten that all the way down to compress the stack, then you will cut what's left of that bolt off. And many people will put a tack weld on there, or will take a punch and dimple that so that the nut doesn't come back off. Because that's where you're, depending on how you're overslung or underslung, your axle's either going to set here or it's going to set on the top side. This was an underslung, so the axle originally rested on the top side. So if you were to take all these springs apart, you can see there's metal to metal friction in there. There's rubbing, there's rust, there's wear, and there may be even some wear right in there where it's moving around. This is a moving part. If you see with it being untied, you can see how there is some deflection in that spring. It's not perfectly level all the way across there. That's just got some age to it. This spring is actually pretty flat. It's lost most of its arch. This question I get a lot to this band up here. Most of the time it will come with a band from the factory. It may be thin metal like this. Some of the older ones, it may actually have a rivet with a little thicker material. These do come off from time to time. People ask, what's that there for? One reason it's there is a lot of times it has part number on it. So it's beneficial if you have that to have the part number on it, but it keeps that stack together. And what I mean by that, I'll try to hold this up sideways. So let me take this off real quick. Let me take the band off. See if I can bend it off of here. So I've got the band off. What can happen if the band is off? If you have some wear on the springs, this is likely not going to happen if it's a newer spring, but if you get some wear on the springs, they will get loose. And if you're not loaded, you may get some bounce. And what will happen, and we see it, one of the shorter leaves will twist. And I'll turn it sideways. That will twist out. And what happens when that twists out, depending on which end it twists, it will get into the side of your tire, cause a tire sidewall rupture, and disintegrate your tire going on the highway. So if you've lost the band, whether it be the thin metal or the thicker riveted metal, this does have a hole in it and an indention to keep that in place. One trick that you can do is take a good heavy duty stainless steel worm gear clamp like we'd find in the plumbing section. Those are not all created equal. Some are very cheap. Get you a good one. You can put that on there. I see some people put that on with rubber, just get a little cushion. And that's not to hold the spring together necessarily. It's just there in case you get some wear. It keeps that leaf. It's just a safety precaution, if you will. It keeps that leaf from sliding out and causing tire failure. So when you check your springs and do a walk around, if you're missing the band, I'd recommend doing that. If you look at this one here, this band here, this is factory. It looks similar to a worm gear clamp, but it's not. It just has a little piece of rubber that may be neoprene, and that is banded together. That just keeps all the leaves where they're supposed to be and keeps you from losing tire. So that's a good place to look. If you have a nylon insert, which is going to be on almost all of your double I springs, if you have a nylon insert, how much grease and how do you put the grease in there? Well, to put the grease in there, you would just have to take the bolt out and put grease in there and put that bolt back. But the question is, do you do that or not do it? My opinion on that is I do not grease nylon bushing. In my opinion, the grease in there will collect road grime, dirt, dust, and it will cause it to be an abrasive, and it will actually prematurely wear this nylon out. The purpose of the nylon is no lubrication, but these do wear out. If it wears all the way through, it's going to squeak. So if you catch it soon enough, you take this out, they're super cheap, and you put a new one in. As you can see in this equalizer, it comes with brand new nylon bushings. Same thing on the equalizers. If you catch it soon enough, then you can just put a new nylon bushing with no grease. You might argue that, hey, I put grease in mine, and that's fine. Again, it's not going to be the end of the world, and it may make it quieter. It's just kind of like on newer vehicles, some of the polyurethane bushings and cab mounts and stuff like that they use compared to some of the old rubber. They get a little squeaky on cold mornings like we had this morning, but they don't break down as quick as some of the old rubber bushing stuff that we used to have in the old days. So I'm not a fan of putting grease in the nylon bushing, but you can retrofit. If you have this set up, you can retrofit the equalizer, the shackle straps, all of the bushings, and you can go back with a brass insert. Many of the equalizers, you can buy those. They either have a steel or a brass insert in them with a wet bolt. I don't have any small ones with me, but I got a big one. So this is a wet bolt. This will be for a larger slipper spring like in your 10K and up. And this is a brass or bronze bushing that would go in there. This has to be lubricated. When those go together, you've got to put grease. Most people don't put grease, and it will crack the bushing. Usually it will crack before it wears all the way through, and the bushing will disintegrate. And then it's just steel on steel, and when that happens, it will wear all the way through the spring. So you can either put, you know, maybe a $15 bolt or bushing, or you're going to put a $100 spring at the end of the day, and it's going to be noisy. Some of the wet bolt kits that you buy will have a double thickness on the shackle bolt. If squeaking is really getting on your nerves and it's making noise, I'm going to recommend you upgrade to brass inserts, wet bolts, and maybe doubling up on your shackle straps. We see it really a lot on travel trailers, RVs. I think it's because the axles are right at the limit of the trailer, so they're already under a strain already, and just going up down the roads, backing into your camping spot is a pretty tight back end from time to time, and it causes that stuff to squeak. So if you're using a nylon plastic, you may want to think about spending the money to go to a better equalizer. They make some that are actually rubber cushion to help with longevity and some of the noise on that and the wear and tear, and then go to a wet bolt system. Convert that over, whether you buy just the bushings and insert them in your springs, or you buy a new spring and put the bushing in there. So there's only so much you can do to keep from squeak. Something we hear all the time, this is the $1,000,000 question maybe of this video: when do I grease and how do I lubricate my leaf springs? Well, in order to lubricate a leaf spring, if this were tight, in order to grease it or lubricate it, you're going to have to get grease in between all of this. I don't know a good way to do that without disassembly. The only thing you could do without disassembly is maybe use a spray-on lubricant. I know a lot of people use like a WD-40 style lubricant. Well, that may stop the squeak. It will attract dirt, grime, and crap. And in my opinion, it's going to cause you some abrasion. It's going to cause you maybe some wear and tear and some gunk that may or may not cause you more squeak. It may stop it. And if that works for you, that's great. I do know of some people that live up north or on coastal regions where there's a lot of salt, either on the road or just in the air, that cause a lot of rust. I do know people that actually will do a full disassembly of their leaf spring, clean it up, rust treat it, paint it, and put it back together. That is a lot of work, but that's actually a good practice. Most everybody that I know does it dry when they put it back together. Also, that being said, if you're in an area where you are subject to corrosion, whether that be on the road or just from the ocean, you need to use a salt neutralizer. A lot of these parts will not keep the paint because they're right on top of the road. They're getting all the stuff off the road. They're getting salt off the road, just sand. They will take all of the coating off, get you a good salt neutralizer, clean all that stuff up, and then you can put you maybe a rust preventative on there, or just tear it down and put some paint. If you're using any of the spray-on rust encapsulators, you're going to have to be careful not to get too much of that in here. You could cause you more trouble than what it's worth. The biggest thing that's going to keep you from a squeak is just a little maintenance, keeping it clean, and from time to time, just replace the parts. If it's me, if it's just a double eye spring, they're not super expensive. If I'm gonna have to go to the trouble to tear it down and try, I'm just gonna buy a new spring at that point, because more than likely, if it's to that point, it's already got some wear on it, so I'm just not gonna take the time to tear that down. I'll maybe give these to somebody that makes knives out of them or something to repurpose them. They make good scrapers. We use some of those. We make them for scrapers in the shop. So in my opinion, I do not grease my leaf springs. I do not grease my nylon bushings. I do, however, grease my brass inserts with wet bolts, but I don't do the nylon. I don't think it helps. I think it actually can cause you some trouble. Sometimes it's just gonna squeak. It's a moving part. It's a lot of different components, just like your automobile. Sometimes it gets a little age on it, it's gonna squeak. Crank that radio up, and if the squeaking stops, that's when you worry, because it may have fell off. Do what you do. Leave me a comment whether you grease, maybe you grease your leaf springs, it works great for you. Leave us a comment, send us a picture, do something on there. I'd like some feedback on that, but from what I see around here, the people that have done it, it's caused a mess underneath there. I know in some automotive applications, there's some differences on that, but this is a trailer application. So when is the best time to grease your leaf spring? For me, it's gonna be never. I'm only gonna grease greasable, wet locations that's got a grease zerk on there, and I'm gonna use my lock and lube grease gun, or I'm gonna use my Milwaukee electric, depending on how much I gotta do. If I just gotta do a few of these, I'm just gonna use the manual lock and lube. I'm not gonna mess with dragging the big boy out. But do your inspection. Hopefully you don't have to deal with too much squeak, and if it's just getting bad, you may want to get that looked at if you don't check it out yourself. So just keep up with your maintenance, keep the good comments coming, keep watching. We appreciate all the feedback on that. I'm going to tell you, after looking at this thing's been rode harder than a rented mule. I don't know how we're going to fix it.